Some people believe the first snowfall is beautiful. I used to believe that too. Until the year it arrived, and you didn't. They say snow covers everything. The roads, the rooftops, the empty branches that have spent all autumn letting go. But no one tells you that snow also uncovers things. Old promises, forgotten voices, the sound of footsteps that no longer belong to anyone. So before we begin, if you've ever missed someone in a season they never came back to, if you've ever found yourself remembering a person because the weather changed, then you're already part of this story. Subscribe, because here, we don't just tell stories. We remember them. The first snow always came quietly, not with a storm, not with thunder, just silence. The kind of silence that makes the whole world stop breathing for a moment. That morning I woke before dawn, not because I had somewhere to be, but because something inside me already knew. I pulled back the curtains. There it was, the first snow. Soft, slow, almost afraid to touch the ground. For a second, I smiled. Then I remembered. This was the first winter without you. Funny how memory works. You can spend months convincing yourself you've moved on. Then one snowflake falls, and suddenly you're standing in a conversation from 10 years ago. I still remember the first time we saw snow together. You laughed. Not because it was beautiful, because you insisted every snowflake looked like it had spent hours deciding exactly where to land. You said, "If snow ever falls when we're apart, promise you'll stop for a minute." Just 1 minute. Because somewhere, I'll be looking at the same sky. I laughed. Called it one of your impossible ideas. You looked at me with that smile that always made arguments feel unnecessary. "You'll remember," you said. "You just don't know it yet." You were right. I left the apartment without thinking. No destination, just walking. The city had transformed overnight. Cars became quiet white shapes. Streetlights glowed softer. Even strangers walked differently, as if nobody wanted to be the first person to disturb the morning. Snow has a strange way of making everyone kinder. Or maybe, just slower. I found myself taking the old riverside path. I hadn't been there in years. Not since everything changed. The benches were almost buried beneath fresh snow. The river moved slowly beneath thin sheets of ice. The air smelled exactly the same. Cold, clean, honest. Then I saw it. One bench. The same bench. I don't know how I recognized it after all these years. Maybe places remember us even when we stop remembering them. I brushed away the snow with my sleeve. The wood beneath was worn smooth. Time had aged it, but not enough. There was still a small scratch near the corner. You made it accidentally with your keys while pretending to carve our initials. You refused to finish because you said, "If people need proof we loved each other, then maybe we didn't love each other enough." Back then, I rolled my eyes. Now, I finally understood. The snow kept falling, slowly, patiently, like it wasn't trying to erase the world, only soften it. I sat down. The bench creaked exactly the way it used to. Some sounds survive longer than people. Across the river, children were throwing snowballs. Their laughter drifted across the water. For one impossible second, I could almost hear yours among them. Grief is strange. It doesn't always arrive with tears. Sometimes, it arrives disguised as hope. You spend a heartbeat believing the impossible, that you'll turn around, and they'll be standing there, hands buried in their pockets, smiling. Late, like always. But the snow kept falling, and no one came. I looked down, near my boots. Something was half buried beneath the fresh snow. At first I thought it was just another fallen branch, but it wasn't. It was red, a scarf, old, faded, covered in tiny crystals of ice. I picked it up carefully. The fabric was worn thin, as though someone had loved it for many winters. It wasn't yours. At least, I didn't think it was. Then I noticed something stitched into one corner. 3 tiny letters. Letters I hadn't seen in years. My hands froze. Not because of the cold, Because I suddenly realized there was only one person who ever stitched their initials into everything they owned. And those initials shouldn't have been there. I stared at the letters for what felt like forever. The snow continued to fall around me, but suddenly I couldn't hear the river. I couldn't hear the wind. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. Only those 3 faded initials. Yours. It couldn't be. I turned the scarf over again and again, hoping I had made a mistake. Maybe someone else shared the same initials. Maybe memory was playing one last cruel trick. But then I noticed the tiny uneven stitch near one corner. I smiled through tears. You always hated sewing. Every birthday card. Every sweater you repaired. Every little thing you tried to fix always carried that same crooked stitch. You used to laugh and say, "If something is perfect, nobody remembers it." I held the scarf against my chest. It still carried the faint scent of cedar and old winters. Or maybe that was only my imagination refusing to let go. I looked around. The path was empty. No footprints except my own. No one had passed by. So how had it gotten here? The answer came quietly. Not from the snow. Not from the wind. But from memory. Years ago, on another first snowfall, you had wrapped that very scarf around my neck because I had forgotten mine. I tried giving it back before we went home. You refused. "You'll need it before I do," I insisted. You laughed. You always think today is forever. That was the last winter we spent together. After everything changed, after life carried us in different directions, the scarf disappeared. Or at least, I thought it had. Until now. I looked toward the river. The water moved beneath the ice exactly as it always had. Time is strange. It convinces us that everything changes. Yet somehow, the river still remembers the same sky. The trees still wait for the same spring. The snow still falls without asking who is missing. Maybe nature never forgets. Maybe we're the ones who spend our lives trying to. I wrapped the scarf around my neck. It was still warm enough to feel familiar. Not because of the fabric, because of what it carried. Some people leave us in obvious ways. A goodbye. A funeral. A final letter. Others leave so quietly that we don't realize they're gone until the seasons return without them. That is the hardest kind of goodbye. The one that arrives disguised as another ordinary winter. I stayed on the bench until evening. Streetlights slowly came alive. One by one, the city became quieter. Snow covered my footprints before I stood up. For years I believed that was the saddest thing about snow, that it erased where we'd been. But I was wrong. Snow doesn't erase. It reminds us. It teaches us that every footprint matters because it doesn't last. Every conversation. Every laugh. Every ordinary afternoon we almost forgot. They're beautiful because they disappear. As I walked home, I stopped halfway across the bridge. The snowfall had become heavier. I looked up. Thousands of tiny white flakes drifted through the glow of the lamps. Then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. The promise. If snow ever falls when we're apart, promise you'll stop for 1 minute. Because somewhere, I'll be looking at the same sky. I smiled. For the first time in a very long time, I kept the promise. I stood there for exactly 1 minute, not because I believed you could still see the same snow, but because some promises deserve to outlive the people who made them. When the minute ended, the ache was still there. But it felt different. Lighter. Like grief had quietly moved from my shoulders into my heart. A place where it no longer hurt to carry. I realized then that healing isn't forgetting. Healing is learning to remember without wishing time would move backward. Some winters break us. Others quietly put us back together. And sometimes, the first snow doesn't arrive to remind us of who we've lost. It arrives to remind us how deeply we were loved. If this story reminded you of someone you'll always carry with you, tell us about them in the comments. Write their first name, or simply write "I remember." Someone reading your words tonight may realize they're not grieving alone. And if this story found a place in your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that love never truly disappears. It simply learns how to fall more gently, like the first snow.